I had a completely different teaching. I mean, just completely different. By Wednesday, it was this really cool teaching about dakav, which means to cleave, dakav. And there's a scripture in our Torah portion that says that God said to Israel, I will make you cleave to me by doing the mitzvot. And then in Jeremiah, God tells Jeremiah to go to buy an ezor, which is like a belt it's actually a girdle. It's where the word girdle doesn't mean what it used to mean. A girdle, it just means like a sash or something that you tighten up to get to work. An ezor. And God tells Jeremiah to go get an ezor, a brand new ezor, which costs a lot of money, and don't wet it, and go bury it by the river. Down by the river. And he says, just go bury it down by the river, Euphrates, because they're in Babylon by then. And then after a couple months or so, he tells him, now go dig up the ezor. And he says, is that any good? He says, nope. And he says, that's how the house of Israel is. I wanted the house of Israel to be tight on my belly, tight on my kishkis, my kidneys, my guts, so they could feel me and hear me, and I could talk to them, and they could feel me close as I could possibly get. But they weren't dipped in water, and they weren't tightened up, and this is what happened. Now it's a lousy Ezra. So that's what I was going to teach. So Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Dakav, did you say? D-A?
Oh, well. I guess I'm not done. What? What?
Dakav? D-A?
I think...
How do you spell it?
Davak.
Davak. That's what I was going to say. Okay,
Davak.
good.
Davek.
Yeah, Davak.
Yeah. D-A-V-A-K. Davek. Means to cleave. So that's not what I'm teaching. I was going to teach that, but that's not what I'm teaching. So instead, God just took me somewhere completely different, and I saw all these hidden messages about the day of the Lord, which I never saw before. And it's all about this part in the Torah portion that says 3 times, Bayom Hahu. Bayom Hahu, in that day. So we're in Devarim 31, 15 through 21, and God says to Moshe, behold, the time for you to die is near. So what's the date? It's this day that he's going to die. What's the date? I can't hear you.
The day is the night.
No. What day is this in the story?
I don't remember.
It's the day that Moses dies.
The day he was born.
The day he was born, right. What's the date?
Adar?
Adar, very good. What?
7.
Yes! Adar 7. Good guess. So this is the day he's going to die, and he says the time for you to die is near. It's not time yet. It's the right day, but it ain't time yet. Call Yehoshua and present yourselves at the tent of meeting, and I would establish him. The Lord appeared in the tent in a pillar of cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent. So both Moshe and Yehoshua are there. The Lord said to Moshe, and I always wondered why it doesn't say God said to Moshe and Yehoshua. It just says God said to Moshe. So maybe Yehoshua didn't hear this. I don't know. The Lord said to Moshe, behold, you're about to lie down with your fathers, and this people will arise and play the prostitute with the foreign gods of the land into the midst of which they are going. And they will abandon me, break my covenant that I've made with them. Then my anger will be kindled against them by Yom Hahu. And I will abandon them and hide my face from them, and they will be consumed in many evils and troubles. You ever heard the Jews say tsuris?
Yes.
Okay, and that's Yiddish. It's Ashkenazic for tsarat or tsarot. Tsuris, same word, tsarot. And it means troubles. What the church translates as tribulations.
Sarat
Tribulation.
Sarat also being like the mold during...
No, that's tsaraat. That's
Sarat.
tsaraat. This is tsarot. The root is tsar, which just means trouble, pressure, tribulation, many troubles. So when is this? It is Bayom Hahu. It's in that day. And during that day, God says, I'll abandon them and hide my face from them, and they will be consumed, and many evils and troubles will find them, so they will say, Bayom Hahu, in that day. Is it not because our God is not among us that these evils have found us? But I will assuredly hide my face, Bayom Hahu, third time, because of all the evil that they have done. For they will have turned away to other gods. Now then, write this song for yourselves, and teach it to the sons of Israel, and put it on their lips, so that this song may be a witness for me against the sons of Israel. And it will come about when many evils and troubles find them, that's in the day of the Lord, that this song will testify before them as a witness. So, this song is next week's Torah portion, Ha'azinu, which is the song. And it's long. It's like, if it was written out like for us to sing, it would be 3 pages long. And it's just a long, long song. But God says, in this portion, he says, I don't have it here, teach the song to the sons of Israel because they will never forget it. Even to the day of the Lord, they're going to remember this song. I don't know how that's possible. I guess it's because it's in the prayer book. But that's the only way they'd remember a song this long. But this is talking about 3 times it says Bayom Hahu in that day. So I started thinking about, he says it in Devarim, at the day he's going to die. God tells him, Bayom Hahu, Bayom Hahu, Bayom Hahu, the Jewish people are going to turn against me in that day. On the day that Moshe is going to die. And I'm like, wait a minute. If it's in Devarim, in the Torah, then it's got to be also before the Devarim in the Torah. Does that make sense? If God says, I'm going to teach you how to make pumpkin pie on the day of your death, there's got to be the recipe for pumpkin pie sometime before the day of his death. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you would think.
You would think, because then it's wasted words. He's about to die. Who cares?
Otherwise they'd go, what's a pumpkin pie?
Exactly. So there's got to be clues of Bayom Hahu before Devarim. Has to be. And so I started to look. I just was like, well, maybe there is. And so I looked up in that day, and boom, boom, boom. I start seeing all these passages we've read 1,000,000 times, and now I see them completely different. Completely different. That's what I'm hoping to communicate. So before we look at that, I want to define the day of the Lord for you from Judaism. Psalm 90 verse 4 is the base scripture that it's all founded on. 1,000 years in your sight, in God's sight, are like yesterday when it is passed by, and like watching the night. In accordance with Rav Katina, just as the Shemitah, that's sabbatic year, how often is the sabbatical year?
Every 50?
No, that's Jubilee.
7.
Every 7 years, occurs 1 year out of 7. So too does the world have 1,000 years out of 7,000 that lie fallow. Now, the way they translate it is destroyed. Like for 1,000 years, the world is destroyed. That's the word that's used in the Talmud. And so because they use the word destroyed instead of fallow, one of the rabbis, or actually 2 of them, say, no, I disagree with that. They say because it says in the scripture, and then they quote scripture that doesn't disagree with this opinion. But it's written as if they're disagreeing with the opinion. So I don't want you to get confused. Now, I've taken that out of the parts we're going to read, that part where it says this rabbi disagreed with Rav Katina, because they didn't disagree. They just had a different facet of it. So, it lies dormant or destroyed or fallow 1 out of 7,000, as it is written, and the Lord alone shall be exalted Bayom Hahu. Isaiah 2:11. So Rav Katina is saying this, in case you didn't catch it. The phrase Bayom Hahu means that 1,000-year day. That's what he's saying. That he says, as it says, the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day, Bayom Hahu. So what day? That's what he's saying. What day? The day that is 1,000 years long. And further, it is written, a psalm, a song for the Shabbat day. So now he's saying it's the Shabbat day. He's saying it's 1,000 years long. He's saying it's Bayom Hahu, in that day. And now he's saying it's the Shabbat day. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So he's saying the Shabbat is how long?
The day, 1,000 years.
1,000 years. And it's God's day. Meaning the day that is Yom Sheku Lo Shabbat, the day that is completely or altogether Shabbat. And also it is said, for 1,000 years in your eyes are but a day that is past. So now he quotes Psalm 90. So he has quoted 3 verses, tied them together to tell us everything we need to know about the day of the Lord. It's 1,000 years long. It's called the Shabbat, and it is when the world is totally like a plowed field, starting over. Now that's from Talmud Sanhedrin 97. Now in Talmud Rosh Hashanah, it says, Rav Katina said the world will exist for 6,000 years, and for 1,000 years it will be fallow, as it is said, the Lord alone shall be exalted by Yom Hahu. And one day for God is 1,000 years, as indicated in the verse, for 1,000 years in your sight are but as yesterday when it is past. Rav Katina's statement is in accordance with the opinion of, look who it is, Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva had how many students?
A lot.
How many? Do you know?
1,000?
40,000. And 22,000 of them died during the counting of the Omer. 22,000 of them died during the counting of the Omer. So he started out with 40,000 students. This is a huge, huge, huge school. And he said that the day of the Lord is 1,000 years long. It's God's Shabbat. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's not Rav Katina, it's Akiva.
Right.
So he's a much, much, much bigger name than Rav Katina. I'm just saying this is fully and well established in Judaism. Fully established. Now, Talmud Rosh Hashanah was the ones who pulled together the Mishnah, the Gemara, the Talmud, Simeon Bar Yochai, saying, hey, remember, Rabbi Katina said this? He's saying, this is the doctrine, this is it. All right. Now, in the New Testament, it quotes it, just like all the rabbis, but do not let this one fact escape your notice, beloved, that with the Lord 1 day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like 1 day. The Lord is not slow about his promise, but the day of the Lord will come like a thief. So he does the same thing Katina and Akiva did. He quotes Psalm 90 verse 4, and then he immediately says, whoop, day of the Lord. Immediately. It's about the day of the Lord. It's not about the coming of the Lord. It's about the day of the Lord. Now this is now I've given you some quotes here that go through time. The farthest back one after the Talmud was Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. 6 eons, or millennia, for going in and coming out, for war and for peace. The 7th eon, or millennium, is entirely Shabbat, Yom Shekolo Shabbat, and rest for life everlasting. Life everlasting, Chaye Olam. So, he's saying the same thing. The day of the Lord is 1,000 years long, 7th millennium, it's entirely Shabbat. Then Rashi, commentary to Avodah Zarah. You guys know what Avodah Zarah means? False worship, foreign worship. It's against Christianity, it's against Islam, it's against just normal paganism. It's against the entire Gemara of Avodah Zarah is about false worship. The world is decreed to last for 6,000 years. This is Rashi, the greatest commentator who ever lived. And he just says, the world is decreed to last for 6,000 years, as the days of the week. The 7th day of the week is Shabbat. So too, in the 7th millennium, there will be tranquility in the world. Now, many, hundreds, maybe thousands of Messianic Jews say, no, that doesn't go along with with the scriptures that there's 6,000 years and then there's another 1,000 years of. That's the millennium. It's called the millennium. And they hold to this position like it's their life, because Christianity has done away with this basic foundational doctrine. And then later on, Nachmanides. You guys know who Nachmanides is?
Mm-hmm.
Who's Nachmanides? Who was he?
He was.
I just remember the name. Rambam.
No, that's Rambam is Maimonides.
Yeah.
Ramban.
Ramban, yeah, but who is it? Who is it? Do you know who he was? He was the head rabbi of Spain. So Rambam, Maimonides, was a little bit before Nachmanides. So Maimonides was in Spain, great rabbi, and then after him was, a little bit after him was Nachmanides. Nachmanides is much more spiritual than Maimonides. So this is what Nachmanides said. The 6th millennium will see the coming of the Messiah. What? You missed it. That's it right there. That's all you need right there. The 6th millennium will see the coming of the Messiah.
Right. Well,
Therefore, yeah, but you ask believers when the Messiah is coming, and what do they say?
Right.
No man knows the day or the hour.
Yeah, that too.
That's what they say. First thing out of their mouth. The 6th millennium will see the coming of the Messiah. And the 7th millennium will be the Shabbat of the Olam Haba. So the 6th millennium, 7th millennium. And that line where one ends and the other begins, that's 6th and 7th millennium. That's the year 6001 at Rosh Hashanah.
So he's
Boom.
saying he'll come before the.
No, he's
first
saying
thing.
they come right at the end of the 6th millennium, and because the 7th millennium is the Shabbat. So
Before
the dividing line of 6th millennium and 7th millennium, that day, that dividing line day,
Rosh Hashanah.
is Rosh Hashanah and is when the Messiah is coming. That's what he's saying.
Right, before the birth pangs start.
Well, they start at the same time.
Well,
They start right on the same day.
yeah.
The 6th millennium will see the coming of the Messiah, and the 7th millennium will be the Shabbat of the Olam Haba, wherein the righteous will be resurrected and rejoice. As is said in Genesis 2:3, and God blessed the 7th day and sanctify it, refers to his blessing the Olam Haba, which begins at the 7th millennium. So there's just zero. And by the way, this is a thimbleful of what the rabbis said. And I just took the biggest ones, that's all. But there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of statements I could have put. Here's a couple more. Psalm 90 verse 4, 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday when it's passed by. 2 Peter 3:8 through 10, the day of the Lord will come like a thief. The 7th millennium will follow the Messiah and the resurrection. The 7th millennium will follow the Messiah and the resurrection. Now it has the resurrection at the dividing point of the 6th millennium and the 7th millennium. So we have the coming, here's the dividing point. We have the coming of the Messiah, the coming of the day of the Lord, and the resurrection, all on that one day. Did you see it?
Yep.
See, he's added something here. By the way, I love Rabbeinu Bachya. I love this guy. The 7th millennium will follow the Messiah and the resurrection, and will be a time of great eternal delight for those who merit the resurrection. This being the case, just as one prepares during the 6 days of the week for Shabbat, so too one should prepare during the 6,000 years for the 7th, for the kingdom. Get ready for the kingdom. And then Rabbi Abarbanel. I don't usually quote much from Abarbanel. He was also from Spain. Similar to the structure of the week of creation, the world will exist for 6,000 years, with the 7th millennium being a hefsek. That's a break. When we're doing Passover, and we do Bedikat Chametz and we get rid of all the leaven, we throw it out the door, we do Biur Chametz, we burn it, and we say this prayer, may this leaven, even if there's leaven I didn't find, may it be hefsek. may it be like null and void. So the 6,000 years, with the 7th millennium being like a break or being null and void, destroyed, fallow, and a Shvita, a rest, like the Shabbat, like the Shemitah, like the Yovel. Now the reason I don't quote Rabbi Abarbanel much is because if I quoted more than this, you guys would go like this. It gets really, really deep, really fast. So that's why I don't quote him much. I like his writing, but I don't quote him much. Yes?
You know, the scriptures you used at the beginning about he alone, God alone would be exalted.
In that day.
That's a big deal that we don't really talk about, but that's what makes the day of the Lord so great. There's not going to be any idolatry. There's not going to be any other gods. It's the
Hallelujah.
God that is exalted.
That's right. There will be no idolatry, no avodah zarah,
Hallelujah.
which is why Rashi talks about the day of the Lord in avodah zarah. Because what he's saying is no more idolatry of any kind. And by the way, when you quote this to Orthodox Jews or Hasidic Jews, they immediately think Christianity.
Right.
So we want to remove that trigger so we don't have to worry about it. All right, so here's back to the verse we started with in Devarim. My anger will be kindled against them in that day, Bayom Hahu, and I will abandon them and hide my face from them, and they will be consumed. And many evils and sarot will find them, so they will say Bayom Hahu. They will say in that day. So everything is, this is what I'm telling you. And I would like you to not believe me. I want you to go check it and check it for yourself and see. This is what I'm going to show you, hopefully, today. Everything in the Tanakh, from Genesis through Chronicles. Chronicles is the last book in the Tanakh. Everything from Bereshit to Chronicles is a prophecy of the day of the Lord, which is why it's in the Bible in the first place. So hopefully that's what you're going to see. It's all about the kingdom. The kingdom, the day of the Lord, the Shabbat, the seventh day, the last day. You could call it any one of those things. All right, here's the first one. I've read this a million times. Now it came about when the sun had set that it was very dark, and behold, a smoking oven and a flaming torch appeared, which passed between the pieces. In that day, the Lord made a covenant with Avram. Bayom Hahu, the Lord made a covenant with who? Was Avram a Jew or a Gentile?
Gentile.
That's what's going to happen. In the day of the Lord, there will be no more idolatry. God's going to make a covenant with all the seed of Abraham, including all the Gentiles. Because he had a lot of Gentiles that were his seed. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
This is going to happen again.
True.
It happened then as a picture of what's going to happen in the kingdom. So what happened was God told Avram, who's a Gentile, get a bull, a goat, a lamb, and 2 birds. I believe that's correct. 2 birds. I don't know if they're rock doves or doves. And he says, cut them in half. That doesn't mean cut them in half this way. That means cut them in half this way, right? And put one half on one side of a pit that you will dig, and one side on the other pit that you will dig, and pass through the pieces. But before he passes through the pieces, which, by the way, that trough is filled with blood, this torch goes through it. The torch and a smoking oven. A smoking oven, don't picture like ovens nowadays. Picture a big round, like a kiva, like a big round kiva oven. And this floating oven goes through the ditch, and then this torch goes through the ditch, and that was God. And then God says, now it's your turn. So then Abraham passes through the pieces, and then this happens. Behold, a smoking oven and a flaming torch, which pass through the pieces. In that day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your seed I have given this land, from the river of Egypt. Now, we don't know what the river of Egypt is. It's said so many times, but we don't know what it is. The boundary, the southern boundary of Israel nowadays is at Nahal Mitzrayim, which means the river of Egypt. And it's like a creek. It's very small. But that's the southern boundary at the top of Egypt, the top of the Sinai Peninsula. That might be the river of Egypt, or it might be the Nile. We don't know. I think it's the Nile. I think,
So
but I
it's
might be
referring
wrong.
To the Euphrates?
All the way up to the Euphrates, to
Oh,
Syria.
To there, okay.
All the way up to the Euphrates. So, Israel has never had that land. Never. Never. But in the kingdom, in that day, when he makes the covenant with Abraham again, we're going to have that whole land. Yeah, he was right. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So hopefully you'll never see this the same. Here's the next one. This is Jacob. This is a long, long, long story. I've printed only one tiny little part of it. So what's happening is Jacob has served Laban for how long?
7 years.
Wrong.
14?
Wrong.
Okay, more. 20.
Yes. Very good. It's actually 20. 20 years. He served Laban for 20 years. It's about to be the 21st year. And before he leaves to go south to the land of Israel, because God tells him to get up and go south to the land of Israel, for a few months, he does this weird, it looks like witchcraft. It's so weird. He does this weird trick to get all the flocks from Laban into Jacob's hand.
Right.
And it takes a few months to do. So here's what Jacob says. He says, let me pass through your entire flock today, removing from the flocks every speckled or spotted sheep and every black sheep among the lambs. Now what he's saying is, he's saying all the garbage. These are the garbage animals.
imperfect ones.
These are the ones that nobody wants. They're not like real beautiful, solid color animal. They're splotchy and ringed and spotted and all this stuff. And nobody wants them. Nobody wants the black sheep either. And the spotted or speckled among the goats, and those will be my wages. So my honesty will answer for me later when you come and say, here I am, I'm going to pay you, but I can't pay you much because you got all these animals that are really mine, so I'm going to take them back from you, and I'm not going to pay you as much. He knows Laban's going to rip him off. And so God tells him to do this weird trick. So then he says, everyone that is not speckled and not spotted among the goats or black among the lambs found with me, you can say, I stole it. Because I'm telling you, take them out and give them to me. They're garbage. You don't want them. I'll take the garbage. Now, I want you to think about Israel and the Gentiles. Okay? And think about all the sheep and goats that are scattered on the mountains of all the Jews. And then the kingdom says in Ezekiel 33, God's going to go like a shepherd and go get all the goats and all the sheep and bring them back. That's what he's doing. He's going to do a trick so that he gets all the unwanted animals back into his camp, which is where they belong in the first place. So he says, so he removed in that day, he removed the striped or speckled male goats and all the speckled or spotted female goats, every one with white on it, and all the black ones among the sheep, and put them in the care of his sons, the 12 tribes of Israel. So now he's taken all that nasty stuff that Laban didn't want and given it to all of his children, all the 12 tribes. But they're going to start producing like crazy. And so he's going to, like his flocks are going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and Laban's are going to shrink. Then Jacob took, and here's like the weird magic-y looking thing that he does. This is so strange. Then Jacob took fresh rods of poplar and almond and plane trees and peeled white strips in them, exposing the white that was in the rods. And then he set the peeled rods in front of the flocks in the drinking troughs. It's not troughs, it's ditches where the water would go, like irrigation ditches where the animals would go drink. And he just stuck these rods on the edge of the ditches when they would go drink. Because it's when they were drinking that they would mate. So he set the peeled rods in front of the flocks in the drinking ditches, and they mated when they came to drink. So the flocks mated in front of the rods. And the flocks delivered, in other words, they got pregnant, and they delivered, and this is so weird, striped, speckled, and spotted animals. Because that's what they saw when they were mating. That's what the girls saw when they were mating, because the boys were jumping on top of them from behind. And they're there, drinking, trying to drink and, being mated with. And then they deliver what looks like the rods. Striped, speckled, mottled. Isn't that weird?
That is very weird.
But it's a picture. It's a picture. The whole thing is a picture. Whenever the stronger of the flock were mating, do you think Jacob would put the rods or not put the rods? Put the rods, because those are the strong ones. I want the strong ones. And when the weaker, sickly ones, he didn't put the rods.
Right.
So they didn't produce striped, speckled, mottled, black, whatever. Right? So by doing this, the sickly ended up being Lavan's, and the stronger ended up being Jacob's.
Right.
Yes.
What I'm seeing is the trees, they're trees.
Yes, they're trees.
They're trees, and trees are people.
People. Trees are people.
And therefore, it's like the trees, the people that are placed before these
Flocks.
they'll be like those trees, they'll be like those people.
Okay, hold on. Who are the flocks? I told you a little earlier. Who are the flocks?
Israel.
Tell me, not just Doug. Tell me, who are the flocks?
Israel.
They're the lost sheep of Israel. They're lost. They're out lost. They're no good. Nobody wants them. Yes? The lost sheep of the house of Israel. Then he gets them, puts them with his sons, and then he puts rods in front of them, and they end up looking like the trees. You're exactly right. These lost sheep of the house of Israel end up looking like these trees, and trees are people.
And what I see is, like, I'm sure we could learn, I know the almond is the shekhed, the
Let's not go into the names of the trees, please. Yes.
So is it kind of like a form of grafting in?
Wow. I never even thought of it. The question is it a form of grafting in?
Yeah, I was thinking the rejects would be like Gentiles.
I guess so. No, they're not Gentiles. They're the lost sheep of the house of Israel. They're not Gentiles. But that's very good, Becca. Maybe it's like grafting. Maybe that's grafting in. Maybe. So, but I want you to see that this trick that he does, when did it happen?
That day.
When did it happen?
in that day.
Come on, say it out loud.
In that day.
There's too few of us to not speak. Okay. That's a cool one. I mean, I never saw that before. I always wondered, like, what is that weird thing he's doing? It's a picture of the day of the Lord.
That goes to reason. It's like if a husband and wife are together and the wife is looking at her husband, she's looking at her husband, it's like, this is a man I love. The children are going to
look like the
man.
husband, right?
They look like the husband.
Well, they're
of course.
mating. That is good.
Yeah,
Very good.
It's the same thing.
Very good. All right, here's a really cool one. Very short. This is when Jacob leaves. He's gone down south. He ends up sending everything he owns across the river. And Esau is coming. His brother's coming with 400 men, supposedly to kill Jacob. Jacob's terrified. He ends up wrestling with God. He sees God face to face, and he beats God in a wrestling match. And then that's when God changes his name to Israel. And this one little tiny verse says, Then Esau said to Jacob, please let me leave with you. Let me go with you. Leave with you some of the people who are with me. In other words, these 400 guys, let me leave some of them with you to make sure you don't get away. But he said, no, it's okay. What need is there? I don't need it. I'm fine. Let me find grace in the sight of my Lord. So Esav returned, did teshuvah bayom hahu, on his way to Seir. Isn't that cool?
Wow.
Isn't that beautiful? So Esav will do teshuvah in the day of the Lord. How do we know that? Give me a verse that tells us that. Give me a verse that tells us that Esav will do teshuvah in the day of the Lord.
Genesis 33:15.
No.
Well, the Chronicle says that Edom will be in the kingdom, and
That is correct. Chronicles says that Edom will be in the kingdom. That's a clue, but it doesn't say that they will join with Jacob, because that's what happens here. Is he?
Zechariah says that all the nations will go up to the mountain.
Yes, Zechariah says all the nations will go up to do Sukkot.
And Edom is there.
Well, yeah, but that's a clue. It's an implication. Where does it come right out and tell us that Edom will be restored in the kingdom? We sang it, my friends, in Amos 9. We sang it. In that
What's
day,
Amos 9?
It's Amos 9, right? Bayom hahu akim. Sukkot David. In that day I will raise up the sukkah of David, and all the nations will return. Up to Zion, skip the lame. Judah returns without shame. Edom and Jacob joined again, and all of the nations called by my name. It says that in Amos chapter 9. In that day I will raise up the fallen sukkah of David, and I will restore Edom, all the Gentiles who are called by my name. And that's what Jacob used in Acts chapter 15 to prove that Gentiles can believe in Yeshua as the Jewish Messiah. That was his proof text. Why? Because they're Gentiles, which is Edom. And so this is the Gentiles, not the previous passage about the goats. This is the Gentiles. So Esav did teshuvah, shuv, in that day on his way to Seir. Got it? No?
Yep.
Okay. Can somebody get me a bottle of water, please? All right, here's another one. Exodus 8. By the way, we're going to come across Amos chapter 9 again. Exodus 8. Thank you very much. Then the Lord said to Moshe, rise early in the morning and present yourself before Paro as he comes out to the water. Do you know what this is talking about? Like what Pharaoh's doing?
Going to wash?
Close.
Bless the water.
No, he's going to the bathroom.
Oh,
He's coming out to go to the bathroom.
in the river?
Yeah.
Gross.
Yeah, well, what do they care?
Where's the water source?
What do they care? He's Pharaoh. He's God, remember? And right, Joe. And say to him, this is what the Lord says, send my people so that they may serve me. Because if you're not going to send my people, I will send swarms on you. Now, in the most translations, the Gentiles put swarms of flies.
Right.
In Hebrew, it's arov. And all the rabbis say arov is swarms of animals, not insects. Arov is like a swarm of wolves and animals, wild animals, hyenas and lions and stuff like that. In this case, it would be, Nile animals like snakes, crocodiles, hippopotami. And it says that all of their houses were filled with them, filled with the swarms. So I guess there were a bunch of hippopotami walking into Pharaoh's house. And Tyrannosaurus rexes and crocodiles and snakes. Send my people so they may serve me. If you don't send my people, I will send swarms, arov, on you and on your servants and on your people and into your houses. And the houses of the Egyptians will be full. Think about this. But what do they call it now? They don't say swarms now, do they? What do we call it? Like a whole bunch of wild animals?
Hordes.
Hordes, we could say. What else? What else do they call it? They don't call it swarms. Look, there's a bunch of wildebeest. No, they don't say herds. Like if you saw a whole bunch of snakes, what would you call that? A gaggle of... Huh?
Aren't those called schools?
No, those are fish. Okay, I don't know. Anyway, arov in Hebrew, it's a whole bunch of wild animals. And the houses of the Egyptians will be full of arov, swarms, and also the ground on which they live. That is disgusting. But in that day, I will set apart the land of Goshen. In that day, I will set apart the land of Goshen, where my people are living, so that no swarms will be there, in order that you may know that I, the Lord, am within the land. I will put a division between my people and your people. Now, if you look up the word Goshen, it's awful. The translation is just awful. It'll say something like delivered, or I don't even know what it says. And then I look up to the root. You cannot find where they got this from. Somebody came up with it and they just said, yeah, it means that. So Justinus doesn't have it. Strong's doesn't have it. None of the translators in Christianity have it. So I went to the root, and there's only one word that sounds like and is interchangeable with Goshen, and that's Goshem. Now, there's a lot of words that have an N sound and an M sound interchangeable, especially in Aramaic. I don't think this is Aramaic, but it certainly started before Aramaic. And so I believe, and I can't prove it, I'll probably find it in Judaism, and then everybody will say, and as we all know, it comes from, but I haven't found that.
It's well established.
Goshen, you're right, it's well established. Goshen and Goshem are basically the same word. This is what I'm saying. And Goshem means rained on. Geshem is rain. We say this when we're saying the Amidah.
No.
The Aleinu. No.
No.
The Amidah. When we're saying the Amidah, we say he causes the wind to blow and the rain to fall. Geshem. This word Geshem, rained on. So think about this. This is in that day, right? It's in the kingdom, and God sets apart his land, and it's rained on. And what does God say will happen with the land of Israel if all the Jews do Judaism? They'll get rain in its season, right? So I believe that that's what this prophecy is. That there will be no wild beasts in the land, no evil people, because it's rained on. And God blesses it, and God makes a distinction between the Gentiles and the Jews. Here's another one. Numbers 32:10 through something. I didn't put the second ending verse. But Moshe said to the sons of Gad and Reuben. All right, so what's happening is Gad and Reuben are on the other side of the river, east side of the Jordan, and the other tribes, they've already passed over, and they're about to take the land, and they want to take the land. They haven't started to take the land yet, but they're going to pass over, and the other tribes, I guess they're being resistant. I guess, but I can't prove it, because Moshe goes off on them. He goes off on them and says, "Don't you remember what happened when God said we couldn't enter the land for 40 years because there was resistance? What are you doing?" And they go, "We just want to build, places for our flocks and herds. We're going to go." So I don't know. I think maybe there was a lot more resistance than we can read in the text. Moshe said to the sons of Gad and Reuben, "Should your brothers go to war while you stay here? Why are you discouraging the sons of Israel from crossing over into the land? which the Lord has given them. This is exactly what your fathers did when I sent them from Kadesh to see the land. For when they went up to the valley of Eshcol and saw the land, they discouraged the sons of Israel, so that they didn't go into the land which the Lord had given them. So the Lord's anger burned by Yom Hahu. So he jumped from 9th of Av, when they went to see the land, all the way to the day of the Lord, and said, don't you remember that in the day of the Lord? So this is a prophecy of the day of the Lord. Isn't the day of the Lord called the day of God's anger?
Yep.
The day of his burning wrath?
Yep.
The day of his burning anger? The day of his red-faced anger? One of them says. That's what it says, his face red with anger. And he swore, saying, none of the men who came up from Egypt shall see the land which I swore to Abraham. And we know from Hebrews chapter 3 and chapter 4, what is this really about?
Well, the day of the Lord.
It's about the day of the Lord, not the land. We know this from Hebrews chapter 3 and chapter 4. So, it's not about the land. What's it about?
The day.
And that's why it says in that day. And he swore, saying, none of the men who came up from Egypt shall see the kingdom, which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So the Lord's anger burned against Israel until the entire generation of those who had done evil in my sight came to an end. So he's railing against these tribes that are on the east side of the river. Why? Because he wants to get them into the kingdom. He doesn't want the same thing to happen again. All right, now this is in last week's Torah portion. Moshe and the Levitical priests spoke to all Israel, saying, be silent and listen, Israel. This day you have become a people for the Lord your God. So you shall hear the Lord your God, and do his mitzvot and his chokim, statutes, which I am establishing you today. Moshe also established the people by Yom Hahu, in that day, saying, when you cross the Jordan, these tribes shall stand on Mount Gerizim to bless the people. What does that tell us about the 6 tribes on Gerizim and the 6 tribes on Eval?
Eval was for the curse. And then
What does this passage tell us about the 6 tribes on Gerizim and the 6 tribes on Eval?
That it's been
that they were
established
gonna-
where they were gonna be? Whether on Gerizim or on Eval?
When?
in that
The
day.
kingdom.
Right, it's going to happen again. The same thing. 6 tribes on one mountain, 6 tribes on the other mountain. The blessing and the curse is also going to happen in the kingdom. Because it's by Yom Hahu, in that day. Moshe established the people in that day, saying, when you cross the Jordan, do this. So when's it going to be done? In that day. Joshua 4. When all the people had finished crossing, then the ark of the Lord and the priests crossed in front of the people. The sons of Reuben, the sons of Gad, the half-tribe of Manasseh, crossed over in battle formation before the sons of Israel. That means in their face, in front of the face of Israel, just as Moshe had spoken to them. About 40,000 equipped for war crossed for battle before the Lord to the desert plains of Jericho. So now they're going to Jericho. In that day, I love this verse. In that day, the Lord exalted Jesus in the sight of all Israel. That's what it says. That's what it says. Yes, it does. It absolutely does. In that day, the Lord exalted Jesus in the sight of all Israel. What's Jesus' name?
It's Yeshua.
Yeshua.
It's not Jesus.
That's what it says. That's what it says. Don't get so locked into words. Are you kidding me? You need to be able to read it like that. In that day, the Lord is going to exalt Yeshua, Jesus, in the sight of all Israel. It's that simple. Isn't that cool? So Yeshua is going to be seen as the king in the day of the Lord, in the sight of Jews, in the sight of Israel, so that they revere him, just as they had revered Moshe all the days of his life. Think about that. Yeshua is going to be at the same level in Israel as Moshe. Man, you don't look like this is like
That's heavy.
hitting you, man. It's amazing.
Moshe's the man.
Moshe's the man, and now Yeshua is going to be the man.
Right.
So, just to show you that Yeshua and Yehoshua are interchangeable names, Zechariah 3, Zechariah prophesied when they were building the second temple. Then he showed me Yehoshua the high priest. Who's the high priest?
Yehoshua.
How do you say Yehoshua? What's the interchangeable name with Yehoshua?
Yeshua.
Which I'll show you. Yeshua, which is Jesus in Greek. All right? Then he showed me Jesus the high priest. That's his name in Greek, okay? Don't get freaky about it. Now listen, Yehoshua, high priest. All right, and then in Haggai chapter 1, the other prophet that prophesied during the same time period, building of the second temple, 1:1 says, on the first day of the 6th month, the word of the Lord came by the prophet Haggai to Zerubbabel and to Yeshua ben Yehozadak, or Yehoshua ben Yehozadak, the high priest. So now we know what his daddy's name is. His daddy's name is Yehozadak. He is the high priest. He's the Kohen Gadol. Yehozadak. Yehu Tzedek. Yah, the name of Yah, God's name. Hu, or Ho, means he. And Tzedek is righteous. Yah, he is righteous. So that's his daddy's name. His name is Yehoshua. Yah, the name of Yah. Ho means he. Shua means salvation. Yah, he is salvation. It is not the same as Yahshua. There's no such name as Yahshua. That's super bad Hebrew. Really, really bad Hebrew. It does not exist. If you contract Yah-ho-shua, if you shorten it, it's Yeshua. That's the shortened form. There's no such thing as Yahshua. Then Yeshua ben Yehozadak and his brothers the priests. And I didn't give you the verse. This is many times. This is in his Ezra and Nehemiah. Same guy, Yeshua ben Yehozadak. But he's called Yeshua. Yeshua. And he's the same guy. He's the high priest. He's the son of Yehozadak. I believe that one is in Ezra chapter 3. Ezra chapter 3. And his brothers, the priest, and Zerubbabel ben Shealtiel and his brothers got up to build the altar of God. This is just like Haggai 1:1. So, in one book, he's called Yehoshua. In the other book, what's he called?
Yeshua.
Yeshua. They are interchangeable names. And there's no such name as Yahshua. That is like bad to the level of pre-kinder. Bad.
It's like Mike and Michael.
Yeah, it's like Mike and Michael.
Rob and Robert.
Rob and Robert, right. But it has to be done properly in Hebrew.
Correct.
So, let's read that again in Joshua. In that day, the Lord exalted, what's his interchangeable name? What's his interchangeable name?
Yeshua.
Say it out loud. Yeshua. Oh, goodness. Yeshua in the sight of all Israel. In that day, in the day of the Lord exalted Yeshua in the sight of all Israel, so that they revered him just as they revered Moshe. I hope you never read this passage the same. Put it in the day of the Lord. And then, shortly after that, they encircle Jericho. Now Yeshua got up early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. Then the 7 priests carrying the 7 shofars in front of the ark of the Lord went on continually and blew the shofars. So the second day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp, and they did the same thing for 6 days. Then, on the 7th day, they got up early at the dawning of the day and marched around the city in the same way 7 times. Only in that day did they, only Bayom Hahu, Now there's 5 different ways to say that day.
Right.
It says Bayom Hahu. There's other ways to say it. I only picked out some of the verses that say Bayom Hahu. There's other ways to say this. They could have said, and on that very day, or and it came about that day. There's many ways to say it differently. But it's not Bayom Hahu. This says Bayom Hahu. Only Bayom Hahu did they march around the city 7 times. So this is a prophecy of the day of the Lord being the 7th time, or the 7th day. Make sense?
Yes.
Pretty simple, right?
Yep.
All right. There's another one in Joshua. So they gathered Joshua and said, since your servants, the Gibeonites, these are totally pagan Gentiles, Canaanites, were fully informed that the Lord your God had established his servant Moshe to give you all the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land before you, we feared greatly for our lives because of you, and we did this thing. Anybody know what this thing is that they did?
They said they were somewhere else and were being persecuted, and they just wanted shelter. That's what they said.
No, but that's close. Nobody knows what they did? They got old bread, and they got worn out water skins, and they put old water in it. I don't know how you do that, but they put old water in it. And then they got on tattered clothing, and they said, we've escaped from where we used to be, and we've heard about you, and we know that you're great. Please take us in. Make an oath to us that you won't kill us. And so they didn't ask God, which was from God, by the way. They didn't ask God because God didn't want them to ask him, because God would have had to tell the truth. And so they got away with this lie, and Joshua made a covenant with them, with these Gentiles. And so because of this lie, we feared greatly for our lives because of you, and we did this thing. And now, behold, we are in your hands. Do to us whatever seems good and right in your sight to do. This he did to them, and saved them from the hands of the sons of Israel, because the sons of Israel found out that they were locals, that they were Canaanites. And they said, we got to slaughter these guys. And Joshua said, we can't. We made a covenant with them. And so he saved them, and they did not kill them. But in that day, Joshua made them gatherers of firewood and labor to draw water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord. I love this verse, but probably only because I'm a Jew. I think Gentiles hate this concept, and I'll tell you why. But it says that he did that in that day to make them drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord to this day in the place he would choose. That means that these Canaanites weren't just taken into Israel. Where were they taken into?
Temple.
To the temple.
Right.
To the altar. In the city that God would choose in Jerusalem.
Way past the wall.
Way past all the walls. Up to the altar. So people read this and they're like, oh God, they made them slaves. No, they made them servants in the temple. So the reason I love this, and Gentiles probably don't, is because it says many, many times. Many times. And this is not why I love it, but people probably think I do because I'm a Jew. It says that in that day, and Amos chapter 9 is one of them, says that they will be servants. Edom will be servants to Israel. And it's not in just Amos chapter 9. There's many verses that say, in that day, those ones that oppressed you and treated you badly and mashed you down, that they will serve you. They will come and they will be your servants. Some of the verses go so far as to say, you will put your feet on their neck. But it's a good thing, because then it says, and they will serve you in the kingdom. So in Amos 9 it says, in that day I will raise up the fallen sukkah of David, wall up its breaches, raise up its ruins, rebuild it as in days of old, that they may own the remnant of Edom, all the Gentiles who are called by my name. It doesn't just say the Gentiles will be brought in. It says that the Jews, listen, will own, like servants, own the Gentiles who come to God. This is a good thing, not a bad thing. But I know it sounds like racist. You just like that because you're a Jew. No, I like that because God's going to flip things right side up. Yes?
Isn't that another form of grafting?
Isn't that another form of grafting? Yes, it is. It absolutely is. Yeah, they're not just brought in, they're brought all the way into the root of the tree. Yep. Very good. So this is an amazing one. In that day, Joshua made the Gentiles gatherers of firewood and labor to draw water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord. All right. We're going to come back to Amos 9 again. 1 Samuel chapter 3. This is about Eli, the high priest. Was he good or bad?
Bad.
Why was he bad? Why do you say he was bad?
Because he was bad.
Because he was bad.
He never disciplined his two kids.
Right, never
He did all
disciplined his
kinds of
kids.
stuff, and then he died because he was bad and fell over.
That's right. He died because he was 400 pounds and he fell over and snapped his neck because he was fat. Big, fat, lazy guy. Then the Lord came and stood and called like he did before, Shmuel, Shmuel! And Shmuel said, Speak, for your servant is listening. He's just a little kid. I don't know how old he is. He's like, I don't know, 8, 9, something like that. Behold, I'm going to do a thing in Israel. Both ears of everyone who hears it will ring. In that day I will raise up. It literally says in Hebrew, Bayom ha-hu akim. That's literally what it says. Bayom ha-hu akim, which is what it says word for word in Amos chapter 9. Bayom ha-hu akim. I will raise up the fallen sukkah of David in that day. I will raise up the fallen sukkah of David. And I think this is not, by accident, because they don't translate it like this in English. They don't say, in that day I will raise up to Eli everything that I've spoken. You know what it says? In that day I will destroy Eli's house. It says horrible things in every translation. It doesn't in Hebrew. In Hebrew it says, in that day I will raise up to Eli everything that I've spoken regarding his house, from beginning to end. Then it says bad stuff. For I've told him that I'm going to judge his house, etc. But before it tells the bad stuff, he gives this amazing prophecy about raising up Eli's house, which is just like raising up the fallen sukkah of David. Because it's bad. It's a bad house. It's nasty. So he says, in that day I will raise up.
Raise up everything that he's spoken about his house.
Everything that I've spoken in regard to his house. But don't picture Eli's house. Picture God's house. His house. It says, Bito, his house. I don't know that it's Eli's house. It could be anybody's house. So why not God's house? His house. In that day I will raise up to Eli everything that I've spoken in regard to his house, from beginning to end. In that day I will raise up the fallen sukkah of David and wall up its gaps. I'll raise up its ruins. I'll rebuild it as in days of old. So it's a good thing, not a bad thing. Yes, Eli was bad. Yes, Eli was fat. Yes, Eli fell over and snapped his neck because he was fat, and his children were horrible. But that doesn't mean anything about the day of the Lord, does it? In the day of the Lord, it's restored. It's all restored. I don't know if you guys know this concept or not, so I'm gonna do it. I think this is the last one. Do you know about the fierce king? You know about the fierce king? You ever heard of the fierce king? No? All right, this is a big concept in Judaism. The fierce king is the false Messiah. The fierce king is the false Messiah. The fierce king is Leviathan. The fierce king is Rahav, which means wide place. No, sorry, it means pride and arrogance. The fierce king is Egypt. All right? 1 Samuel 8, this is when God, all of Israel is saying, give us a king, give us a king. We want to be like the Gentiles. And God's like, you want to be like what? We want to be like the Gentiles. Give us a king like they got. And Samuel's like, no, this is wrong. But they won't shut up, and they keep saying to God, we want a king. We want to be like the Gentiles. And so God says, fine, give them a king, but tell them what it's going to be like. And so this is within the midst of Shmuel telling them what it was going to be like, what it is going to be like. The king will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his servants. Then you will cry out, Bayom Hahu. You will cry out in that day because of your king that you have chosen for yourselves. But the Lord will not answer you in that day. Remember, it said the same thing in the Torah portion. It will come about, Bayom Hahu, I will not hear them, I will not answer them. So this is a prophecy of the day of the Lord, when Israel cries out to God in the birth pangs, but they brought it on themselves by turning to the fierce king. Now, the fierce king is talked about in Isaiah 19:4, and it's talking about Egypt, and it's easy to miss if you don't know what you're looking for. Do you know that Pharaoh is a picture of the false Messiah?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the basis that all of this is built on. The Pharaoh was always a picture of the false Messiah. So in Isaiah 19, it says, the oracle concerning Egypt. So this is a prophecy against Egypt. And then it says, the heart of the Egyptians will melt within them, so I will incite Egyptian against Egyptian, and they'll each fight against his brother and each against his neighbor. Didn't Yeshua quote that in Matthew 24? Neighbor, city against city, kingdom against kingdom, etc. This is one of the ones. In fact, it says it here, the very next part. And they will fight against each his brother and each against his neighbor, city against city, and kingdom against kingdom. Word for word what Yeshua said. Then the spirit of the Egyptians will be demoralized within them, and I will confound their strategy so that they will resort to idols and ghosts of the dead, to mediums and spiritists, and I will deliver the Egyptians into the hand of a fierce king, a cruel master. This is the false Messiah. Now it says God is going to deliver the Egyptians into the fierce king's hand. But here, it's Israel. Why? Because Israel has turned to Egypt.
Right.
And so, who's the head over Egypt? The fierce king, Pharaoh. And so, this is a prophecy of the day of the Lord, in the birth pangs, when many evils and troubles will find them. And then they will say in that day, is it not because our God is not among us that these evils have found us? But I will assuredly hide my face in that day because of all the evil that they have done. Okay, it's not the last one. 2 more. This is one of my favorite stories, and I've been mispronouncing his name for 35 years. I just found out yesterday I've been mispronouncing his name. I've been saying Michayahu or Micaiah. It's Michaihu. That's hard to say. Michaihu. 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 So Michaihu is one of my favorite guys in the Bible because he is fearless and he tells the truth, but he does it sarcastically at first. Nice, right? Then Zedekiah, the son of Hananiah, approached and whacked Michaihu on the cheek. That doesn't mean bad boy. That means punched him in the face. And he said, now look what he says. How did the Ruach Yehovah pass from me to speak to you? That's what Hananiah says after he punches him in the face. How did the Ruach Yehovah, the Spirit of the Lord God, can you imagine that happening in church?
Right?
How did the Spirit of the Lord come from me into you so you prophesy this? And Michaihu said, you're going to find out, boy. You're going to see in that day. You're going to find out Bayom Hahu, when you go in a room to another to hide yourself. Battle raged in that day. This is a few verses later. Battle raged Bayom Hahu, and the king was standing in his chariot against Aram. Now what it says in English is the king was propped up in his chariot because he got hit by an arrow, and the chariot kept going. He was propped up, okay, in battle against Aram. Not what it says in Hebrew. In Hebrew it says, the king. Who's the king? No. Who's the king in that day?
The fierce king?
No, in that day. Bayom Hahu. Who's the king? God. Standing in his chariot. This is God coming in battle against Aram, the Syrians. But it makes it sound just like, it's an event that happened. The king got hit in the shoulder or the neck or whatever with an arrow, and he's propped up in the chariot, and he's bleeding out. That's not what's going on. This is a prophecy of the day of the Lord when King, the God of the universe, the King of the universe, comes in his chariot against Aram in that day, Bayom Hahu. So he tells him, how did the Ruach Elohim, Ruach Yehovah go out from me and prophesy in your mouth? You're going to find out when you go hide yourself in that day. You're going to go from place to place to place trying to hide, and you're not going to be able to hide in that day. So where does it say that? Isaiah 2 says it twice. So the common person has been humbled and the big person has been brought low. Enter the rocks and hide in the dust from the terror of the Lord and from the splendor of his majesty. Why? Because he's coming in his chariot. The proud look of humanity will be brought low, and the arrogance of people will be humbled, and the Lord alone will be exalted by Yom Hahu. And the pride of humanity will be humbled. People will go into caves of the rocks and into holes in the ground away from the terror of the Lord and the splendor of his majesty. When he arises to terrify the earth, Bayom Hahu, people will throw away their idols of silver and gold in order to go into the clefts of the rocks and the crannies of the cliffs to hide from the terror of the Lord. They're going to go from place to place to place, trying to hide from God coming. And Hananiah is a picture of those people, those evil people. But Michaihu is a picture of the righteous to whom God comes to defend them in that day. And I think this is the last one. Yeah. Nehemiah 12. And in that day, they offered great sacrifices and rejoiced because God had given them great joy. And the women and children rejoiced too, so that the joy of Jerusalem was heard from far away. When is this going to happen? In that day. They offered what?
Sacrifices.
That means there's going to be sacrifice. When? In the kingdom. You say, of course, but nobody reads this verse like that. Everybody reads like, okay, in the days of Nehemiah, they gave a bunch of sacrifices, and there was great joy. Yay.
Like they brought in money.
Right. Right. But in that day, there's going to be great. Read it again. In that day, they offered huge sacrifices. A lot. millions of sacrifices. And they rejoiced doing it. This is a prophecy, a hidden prophecy about all the Jews and all the Gentiles coming to the temple in the day of the Lord to offer sacrifices. And we are done. Shabbat Shalom.